Hi, welcome to my comparison of the Deepmind 12 and the Prophet 6. It's a bit of an odd one, this, because you can buy 3.5 of these for the price of this, and I don't think anyone's thinking, do I get a Prophet 6 or a Deepmind 12? Like other comparisons, like a Rev 2 versus a Prophet 6 or a Deepmind 12 versus the 106. They're sort of comparable. These aren't, but I do think people might be thinking, is this really poor quality or is this really overpriced? Why is a 12 voice analog poly £670 and a 6 voice analog poly 2,300, 2,400? So there's a massive difference in cost, but is there a massive difference sonically? So the architecture is different. If you're watching this, you probably know that already, but I'll just quickly run through it. This is sort of based on a Prophet 5, so it's only got one LFO. This has got two LFOs. This has got two oscillators. This has got two oscillators and a sub. And each of these oscillators can go from a triangle through to a saw to a square. And this is a bit odd in that this is a bit like the Juno 106. You have a saw or a square. And the second oscillator is just a square, but you can alter you can sort of modulate the tone of it, sort of like wave shape it a little bit, and you can modulate the pitch and stuff like that. So similar to a 106, and these are sort of two completely sort of independent oscillators. These are either on or off, the square's on or off, or the sawtooth's on or off, whereas these you can mix them, and then you can mix in the sub into that as well. Should also mention they've both got an arpeggiator and a sequencer. I'm not going to go into too much depth on the arp and sequencer because I think this is more about the sonics of it, how do they sound, the different architecturally, and there's lots more you can do sort of on the screen on this, and it's got a great editor as well. They've both got good editors. The one that comes with the Deepmind 12 is free. The one that comes with the Prophet 6 costs about $70, is it, or $100 if you get the plug-in version as well. So again, adding to the price of this. So moving across to the filters, they've both got a low pass and a high pass. The low pass on this is fixed at 24 dB. This is 24 or 12 dB. And the high pass on this isn't resonant, but it is resonant on this. Envelope wise, this has got fixed filter or amplifier envelope, a bit like an old vintage synth. This has got 3 envelopes, so fixed on the VCA or the VCF, but it's got a modulation matrix where you can do all sorts of things. So over to modulation. This has got the polymod that the old Prophet 5 had. So you can use the filter envelope or oscillator 2 to adjust frequency of oscillator 1, the shape, pulse width, or the filters. So that's your cross modulation effectively. This doesn't have cross mod, but it does have a modulation matrix, which has got 8 slots, which is sort of 8 channels of modulation, and it's got 21 sources and 130 or 135 destinations. So the modulation capacity of this is huge. So this is more flexible from the oscillator point of view, and this is more flexible from the modulation matrix point of view. So moving on to the effects, this has got 35 different effects units by TC Electronic and Clark Technic. And you've got 4 slots. You can have 4 running simultaneously. You can have them in send or insert, or you can bypass them. And there's 9 different effects routines in there. On this, you've got 2 effect slots that are in series, and you've got a choice of 13 effects. You've only got 2 parameters you can change on each. All have been well tuned and well picked, but you know you can't dig into the effects on this. Whereas on this, I think there's up to 12 different parameters on each of the effects. Also, the GUI on the editor for this is really good. It shows you what the effect's based on, whether it was like a lexicon hall, for example. It just makes life easier for you, especially if you're using the editors. So on paper, we've got 12 voices here, we've got 6 there, we've got 3 envelopes, we've got 2 envelopes, 2 filters, 2 filters, 3 oscillators, 2 oscillators, 2 LFOs, 1 LFO, polymod section, and a huge modulation matrix. So on paper, they're looking like equivalent sort of synths. This is VCO, not DCO, so that does make a difference. But, you know, you wouldn't expect that to have a 3.5 times price difference. So let's start taking a look at the sounds. I start off with a straight sawtooth as I normally do. And you can see from those frequency analysis that actually they're very, very similar, aren't they? And looking at the oscilloscope, that's quite a curved ramp or sort. And that's a bit curved as well. It's not like the Juno 106 that was really a straight curve. A straight line. So the saws don't look too different, do they? And they don't sound too different. So let's move on to the square on this. Now we're doing after doing the 106 review, the 106 comparison, that the square low down on this sounds gritty and fuzzy and it's got like a bit of a wobble to it, and higher up it's a very clean. You can see that, you can hear the grittiness, and in the frequency analysis you can see that, can't you? Let's try that down here. It's a lot more stable. Is it more expensive to make a pulse really stable low down? I don't know. But that square on oscillator 2 is only a square. It can't move from a triangle to a saw to a square, and everywhere in between. High up, this has got more of those intermediate frequencies, so this is a bit buzzier. About there they're the same, and as you move up, this becomes buzzier, this becomes cleaner. But I do know, I've had a little play with this together. It's difficult to produce the sounds this can do on this with a square, just because they do sound different. And that's not that being any worse, that's just that it sounds different to this. Okay, let's attempt to do the sawtooth and the square together. So I've put this sort of midway, just over midway between the sawtooth and the square. And it's a similar looking wave shape, isn't it? So that's interesting. And again, as soon as you introduce that square, you get that sort of grittiness. So let's try high up. But obviously on this we can go from the triangle to the saw, and from the saw to the square, which you don't have that capability on this. And perhaps making oscillators that can go continuously from one shape to another is another way, you know, is another huge expense, and there's two of them on this. And just quickly, let's just show you the sub on this. It's a square, although the wave shape's really weird. Really nice, clean sound. Let's have a listen to a square on this, that low. So the square on that sounds a bit wobbly. Let's have a listen to the sub. Mind you, the sub on this is a triangle, isn't it? So that's not really going to help. Oops. So is there a difference between a VCO and a DCO? Let's have a quick listen. Let's just put the saw back on. Now we look at that sort of frequency there waving. And that changes as different voices come into play, as the phase of different waves is changing. So let's try that up here. So different as well, but they're not moving like these are. I'm taking the oscillator drift or the slop off, make sure that's on 0. So that could quite possibly be a DCO versus VCO. That's maybe why people think the VCOs sound warmer, because the sound's sort of got some movement in it. But you can put a bit of slop on this, and let's just try that, see if it makes any difference. So let's go into the poly mode, oscillator drift. Just turn it up a tiny bit to 1. There you go, some movement. So put it onto 2. So that's interesting. The oscillator drift of about 2 equates to the VCO movement in this. So that's a very basic look at VCO versus DCO. I'm sure it's more complicated than that. However, you know, an interesting little discovery, I think. So next up, we'll look at the filters. So we'll use a sawtooth as normal. Okay, filters on full there. Let's just start closing them down. So both 24 dB, both acting the same there. Sort of as you'd expect, but the difference with this is that you don't lose bass and volume when you turn the resonance up, and that's not a criticism of this in any way. That's what a Moog ladder filter does. It's what it does on the Roland Junos. So this is more like a Prophet 5. So let's add a bit of resonance. Drops in volume and the bass drops out straight away. As you'd expect. And with this, actually increases slightly, doesn't it? Try it with one note. Just up. The resonance on this, as I noticed with the Juno 106 comparison, is huge. It's really, really spiky, and actually just turning this up here, you can see the resonance coming in, which you wouldn't expect. Look at the top of the frequency. So let's play with the resonance a little bit. It's on 50%. So that needs a bit more. And I noticed that this versus the Rev 2 and the Prophet 8 as well, they're more resonant than this, or you get much more play in the lower ends. It's really difficult keeping the volumes level, by the way, so apologies for that. Just that, as you see, when I move the resonance up, everything changes. So we're still in the same ballpark, but as you take the resonance higher on this, it sort of goes a little bit uncontrollable. Over 8 on this, it's really spiky. So I'll just take it up to full, just so you can see. Might want to turn your speakers down or your headphones and watch your ears here. Ouch. But with this, you can tend to have it at full resonance and it's still almost musical. It's still not, you know, the fundamental's still in there. With this, it's just too much, I think. I'm not sure what the musical use, and it could be good for effects and stuff, but taking this over 8, if I'd been designing this, I think myself, I'd have kept it at a maximum about there. And I think that's what makes things like the Prophet 6 easy to use. I've said this before, it's that they've been sort of tuned almost so that you can't make them sound bad, you can't take it outside the musical limits. But what annoys me on this is that there is stepping on the cutoff and that, so you can tune the resonance, but it really annoys me. If you do a filter sweep, it doesn't step, but it does when you're turning the knob. So just looking at that again, I've just set these so that they're getting similar resonant peaks. And this is on 75. And that's on 80 or so. And you can hear there the different voices being calibrated slightly differently. You get this on all analog synths. Just take that off. You can hear the different frequencies there of the cutoff. Do the same on this. So the slightly different, on this the more different, it's all calibrated. Juno 106 was say much worse than this. The differences were quite shocking. You can hear them on this, but they're not as distinct as this. Again, is that why this costs more? We're on the limit of what you'd actually use in a track, but you know, interesting to look at. So the differences are as you'd expect. This doesn't lose bass, this does, and the resonance on this is a lot harsher than the resonance on this. So let's move on to the high pass. That goes a lot higher, doesn't it? So that's on about, I don't know, 45%, and that's on full. So that's a lot more effective. Also, this has got resonance on it as well. Which is great for some sounds. So the high pass is more flexible, but the low pass on this has a 2-pole mode as well. It's a resonant 2-pole. Let's just show you that. That's the 4-pole. Really nice for some pad sounds, that. Let's put the sort of sawtooth with the filter. We're in the same ballpark. So, you know, after I've said all that, when you're putting it together, there's no massive difference. This doesn't sound, oh my God, this sounds awful. These are minor tweaks, minor differences. Look at the oscillators and the filters. I don't really want to look at the envelopes, that's a bit boring. But the effects are really interesting, I think. So the effects on this, let's put them on, that's on or off, straight on or off. Not as simple doing it on this, obviously, because you've got more options. But I haven't really mentioned the fact that this has got the screen, so you can see the name of your sounds and stuff like that. You know, a screen makes a big difference, especially if you're playing live and you're trying to find stuff. So let's try and do that on this. All I've done is that bucket brigade delay on effect A and a Hall on effect B. So on effect B, you know, different types of reverbs, flans, phaser. So let's leave that on the Hall. I'm just trying to replicate that up here quickly. There's no point in me trying to do something there and replicate it here, because most of what this can do, this hasn't got a hope. So let's go in, effects. They're in bypass at the minute. I'm going to put them in series. They're in series in there. So that's the standard setup. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to put them in insert mode. And the reason being, and this is a flaw in the effects, I think, on this. If I put them into insert and bypass, put them into ascend, and there's a slight delay between what's being sent to the effects and what's coming straight through, and you instantly get this sort of flanging. That's bypassed, that's through ascend, and that's the insert. So if you're using a punchy sound like this, I'd always use insert rather than send, because it changes the sound. So okay, we've got a delay there. Let's put it back into the insert, delay, and now we go in here and find the Hall reverb. There we go. Let's knock it down a bit. What's this one on? Mix wise, 9. So let's just take it low. But again, there's so many more parameters on this. On this, we've got 12 parameters on that. On this, we've got 2. We've got the delay time and the feedback. Still effective, though. One thing I have noticed on the effects, though, and it only makes a difference when I turn stuff up and listen to stuff quite loud, is that they add quite a lot of noise to the system. And I'm constantly turning the volume up and down depending on which effects. And I think that's to do with the gain staging and the fact that you've got so many effects and that you've got to sort of balance things in this. But I have noticed that this does get very noisy. If we were scoring points here, I think this is one on the filter. Although this is slightly more flexible with its 2-pole mode, there's a really nice sound to that. And I don't think anyone could disagree with that. And the high pass filter on this is more flexible with the resonance. So overall, I think the filter wins. Oscillator wise, I think no one could disagree with the oscillators are more flexible on this. They've got the 3 wave shapes and the continuous wave forms between them. Plus you've got the mixer section. So these are just on or off. These you can mix them independently. Plus this has got a sub. Oscillator 1 and 2 are slightly different on this. The tone modulation doesn't do PWM. I'll show that in a little bit. So it has got more tones. It's got tones that this can make that this can't. But overall, I'd say this is in the lead on that bit, which is maybe what you'd expect looking at the specs of them. So let's just create a really simple bass sound, just putting a tiny bit of envelope amount on and knocking the cutoff down. You'll notice there's some little clicks coming in occasionally on some of the. Only occasionally, so it didn't do it then. Did it then? This isn't doing that, and this sounds a bit richer and fuller on this sound. But interestingly enough, once I start adding other bits, they come back into play again. But just to show you, this sound feels more controlled when I'm designing a sound and playing with it. I feel like I know what I'm going to get. This one, sometimes I'm trying to get rid of maybe a click or just trying to make it sound a bit richer and fuller, and I feel as I'm playing this, and this is what people say about it, it doesn't do anything bad. Look at a slightly more resonant sound then. In the same ballpark still. And that's just a straight sawtooth with a cut-off reduced a bit. Some minor differences in tone there, maybe a little bit more on the frequency on this. Sticking to sounds that we know they can both do. This doesn't sound like a really cheap synth in any way. There are differences we can see as we go along, and maybe all those differences do add up. Moving on to a bit of pulse width modulation. If there are differences, they're so minor as to be inconsequential, aren't they? Maybe that's a bit brighter up here. But now let's make that into a dual oscillator PWM. So I've got pulse width on this and it's just slightly detuned and it's being modulated by the LFO as well. On this, we can add the second oscillator, but it sounds different. I'll just show you that quickly. On the pulse, if we have this up, put onto manual. So the tone modulation isn't doing the same as PWM, is it? Because this is PWM, you'd expect. Let's go down here. We can hear that they're different. These are identical to each other, so this tone is going to be different. Let's put those back on LFO. Let's get the pitch right. I'm just slightly detuning that oscillator. So this can't make that sound and that can't make this sound. Both nice, but this is the more classic of the two of those type of sounds. So let's try and emulate. Let's just try and copy a couple of the sounds then, shall we? Let's just start off with sound A1 on this. So go down the banks to A1. And what's really interesting when you look at any of the sounds on this, they're almost impossible to recreate on this because of this modulation section. It's really quite funny. But I've had a go. So I've got pretty close with that. We're using the effects as well. So what's that called? That's called Blue Dolphin. Nice 2 oscillator sound. Separated by a 7th, I think. And using LFO2 to modulate the pitch. Well, LFO1 or the LFO on this one. So then I moved on to the next one, which is chord play. This is quite nice little arpeggio. This has only got a delay and a hall on it. I think this has got a few more effects. Yeah, it's got a deep reverb, a 3-tap delay, a chorus, and a flange verb. It's got more going on in there. But I must say, I prefer it with less effects. So maybe let's take out the flange verb, and let's take out the chorus. So getting closer. Interesting, this you can adjust the gate time. You can't do that on this unless you adjust the amplifier envelope. Still, I was quite pleased I got that close with that one, to be honest. There was quite a lot going on there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 things being adjusted by the LFO and that. So the resonance, which you can't do on this, the frequency, which you can, but you can adjust different amounts of everything. Once this, you've got the one amount for everything that you've got in there. So this, you've got resonance, frequency, noise level, and pan. So you haven't got any way of adjusting the pan on this. And if you're adjusting stuff on this, you can't adjust the levels between them. So I could only adjust the VCF frequency on this using that. I couldn't do the resonance or the noise level or the pan. But still close. So then I had a look at sound number 3. And basically gave up straight away because there just isn't a hope in hell. We've got Mod Wheel doing 2 things, the frequency and the resonance of the cutoff, and then we've got all the other 6 all doing different things, and forget it. So I moved on to the next one, and this has got so much modulation going on, but it's got a really interesting modulation there, where you've got this is oscillator 1 synced to oscillator 2, but it's using the LFO on this. It's using the different LFOs that you get from the different voices. So although the LFO is at the same frequency, they're out of phase, so you're getting this really lovely effect on here. I'll turn that down. I'll take the effects off. That's brilliant, I love that. So syncing that with that. All of a sudden you start getting into, I could manage it a little bit there. I could use the oscillators through the polymod to do the same sort of thing, but then I've lost oscillator 2. Then when I sync oscillator 1 to oscillator 2, it's then sync into the waveforms going up and down. So had to give up in the end and did a similar thing. But it's not the same as this. So yeah, you can sort of get close to various things, but it's where the sort of comparison starts to really break down, because the modulation matrix in this is amazing, and this just can't compete. And as soon as you start getting into any of the presets on this, you're like, oh, you're trying to figure out a way of doing what this can do, and it generally can't. But it does have the polymod section. So let's just get a simple tone up. I'll just show you that quickly. And the polymod is where you would, it's the cross modulation. So oscillator 2 can modulate the frequency of oscillator 1, for example. Doesn't sound that impressive to start with, does it? But then you start adding. And you start getting really interesting tones. You can't really do that on this. If you see my Prophet 6 versus the Rev 2, you'll notice that. You can sort of do it using LFOs. I mean, that's a very specific effect, but I think this sound here uses that. Without the polymod. And then with it. You're just getting a sort of richer sort of sound. So let's have a look at how you do something similar. So, you know, I've tried to make things that this can do on this and sort of close. So things that this can do that this can't really do. Let's have a look. So straight up. So say what I'm doing, modulating the pitch of that, aren't I, with oscillator 2. So let's modulate the pitch of oscillator 1 with LFO 1 going really quickly. Edit, change the shape. So it's not doing the same thing, but if I take the sync off there, you're not going to get your clangs and your chimes unless you've got frequency modulation. Again, it's where it, you know, where the comparison falls apart. So how would I summarize this? Well, 2 4-octave keyboards, nice and neat. One's £670, one's about 2,300, plus your editing software on top of that. Lovely knobby interface, quite knobby interface, but there's quite a lot of menu diving you do on this, but at least it's got a nice screen to do that with. Sound-wise, I do prefer the sound of this. Now that could be psychological because I spent over £2,000 on it, but I don't think so. I think this has a richer sort of tone to it. But I wouldn't say this is bad in any way. I think it's got a different sound to it. If I put this up against the Juno, for example, Juno 106, I'd probably be saying exactly the same sort of thing. But if I had one of these, I'd be quite happy to get one of these for going gigging with. It's smaller, it's lighter, and you know, you may be less worried that you're gonna drop it. But I think this is really good. So I've not answered the question of why is this 3.5 times more expensive? You have to sort of work that out yourself. Looking at each of the different sections though, you know, they've got pluses and minuses on both, but I think on balance, this is the nicer synth. But you'd expect it. It's not as polished as this, but I don't think it ever intended to be.